This is a smear. They're basically the animation equivalent to motion blur, and they're kind of famous for creating weird and funny looking frames if you pause at the right time. But if you pause and look at all the smears out there in the world, they all seem pretty different from each other. Sometimes there's multiple drawings, or brushed speed lines, or weird anatomy. Is it really as simple as just motion blur? The thing about smears is that they didn't really exist until a few decades after animation was developed, with early 1900s animation using speed lines to convey fast movements, a comic book technique. When budgets got tighter in the 1940s due to World War II, it was cheaper and faster to use smears to connect one pose to another. Over time, smears became a technique like any other, especially after the rise of television animation, where smears could connect two key poses without a ton of frames, which is pretty useful when you have hours and hours of animation to do. But animators also discovered that smears were useful for a lot of different purposes and stylistic choices. And in my opinion, that goes well beyond just recreating motion blur. Not that motion blur isn't part of it, it absolutely is. Smears as a technique began because animators saw the motion blur in live action film and felt that adding it to their animation would make it more convincing. But I feel like it's grown beyond that, still including motion blur, but also for lots of other purposes. So I want to expand that definition and talk about what motivates an animator to use smears besides motion blur. First, let me ask the question, what are smears usually intended for? I would simplify it like this: to make a fast movement more readable and less stiff. At times, you may not have enough frames to visualize the kind of movement you're animating. If you've only got a few frames to work with, you'll still need anticipation, action, overlapping action, and settle somewhere in there. But the movement might be too big, yet also too fast to include all those poses, so you put a smear in the middle. The smear makes the most important part of that movement readable. The viewer can easily see what just happened, even though it was a big, fast movement across the screen. But I want to stress that even if you did have more frames, you would still want to use smears. Take any 3D fighting game, for example. Most of them are 60 FPS, but they will usually still use VFX smears because it makes the action more readable. More frames is more information, but it's not always useful information. Without a smear, more frames can actually be busier and harder to understand. And in fighting games, it's pretty important to understand what just happened when something hits you in the face. Ow. There are also times when characters move unrealistically fast, and it would be impossible to animate it normally in a few frames. This is usually where multiples come in, drawing extra parts of the character to show a fast, rapid action. These can be along an arc to make something super readable, a straight path to give a fast action a lot of power, or scattered in a bunch of places to show lots of quick movements without needing extra frames. Multiples can effectively be like after images in motion blur photography, but they can go a step further than that. If you need part of the character visible for just one more frame than you have available, you can create a fake frame with a multiple. In motion, it'll seem like 2 frames when it's really just 1. The extra fake frame with a multiple smear helps the viewer see and focus on an important part of the character, and I just think that's pretty cool. Smears can also make an animation feel less stiff. Animation already has lots of techniques to keep things loose, like squash and stretch and drag. Normally, both these principles don't really distort the character in any way. Squash and stretch maintains a sense of volume by stretching outwards, equal to how much you squash inwards, and vice versa. The mass of the character stays consistent. Meanwhile, drag can pull parts of the character behind the main action, so they don't feel too stiff or static. However, you can push both these principles with very subtle drag smears, which distort the character for just a frame or two to really accentuate both drag and squash and stretch. Depending on who you ask, these aren't really smears and are just very exaggerated extensions of those principles, but I see them as smears if only because they distort the character in the exact same way smears do. If you compare these to normal frames of squash and stretch or drag, you can kind of see what I mean. They almost seem like off-model errors, but in motion are pushing the animation to its limits in ways that I think are absolutely genius and look extremely fluid and lovely. Until recently, this was the main way smears were added to 3D animation. By just pulling on the bones of 3D characters, you can add very subtle smear frames to what would otherwise be very stiff, rigged animation. Nowadays, many films and games are adding smear frames directly, which we'll talk about how to do later in the video. Now, you may think all of this is exclusive to cartoonier art styles, but even a little bit can add a lot to more realistic animation. Sometimes animators will break the pose of a character to exaggerate a snappy movement, or they'll use abstract smears that go way beyond what normal motion blur would produce, all in order to prevent their animation from looking stiff. After all, humans in real life aren't stiff either. For fractions of a second, they'll bend and twist and drag in ways that you may not notice, but you do feel. So even realistic animation will seek to recreate this whenever possible, using smears to distort characters even further than real life normally would. Animation is all about exaggeration, so when real life itself looks a little exaggerated in the middle of an extreme motion, you gotta exaggerate the exaggerated. During the research of this video, I needed a way to track all the smears out there in the world. To help with that, I used Milanote, the sponsor of today's video. Milanote is like a virtual bulletin board, but with a ton of digital features that allow you to organize, collect, and plan your projects more effectively than paper. For this video, I collected a ton of screenshots of smears from all kinds of media, and categorized them using Milanote's cards. By organizing all my research like this, it helped me focus the thesis of my video, allowing me to visually compare all the various smears I found, and more effectively understand the different purposes for them. I also used Milanote to help plan the different media I wanted to talk about, using their storyboard template. Usually I don't have a very good way of planning out what kind of clips I use for my videos, but it was really important for this video to know what kind of visuals will be on screen during different parts of my script. Milanote was a really big help by being able to write my script, while also being able to visualize it using storyboard cards. One of my favorite features is how you can just drop a file right from your computer straight into your board. You don't have to mess with any uploads or attachments, it just automatically creates a card you can move around, edit, draw over, and even caption. This even includes videos, by the way, which kind of blows me away. You can just take an MP4, drop it in, move it around, draw all over it, and it'll still play right within the board. Like, this is actual witchcraft. I don't know any other tool that does this right in your browser. In my case, being able to immediately caption my screenshots was great for keeping track of what media a screenshot is from, so I know where to look when I need to edit it into the video. And you can easily share your boards with your team, inviting your coworkers, clients, or even your friends to collaborate on a board together. They can easily add notes, draw on your board, and give feedback all in real time. Milanote is available for free with no time limit, and I super encourage you to give it a try. I'm really picky with sponsors, but using Milanote genuinely expanded my animation research and sort of ended up transforming this video into something I'm really happy with, so I highly recommend it. Sign up using the link in the description below and let me know in the comments what you're using it for. Thanks again to Milanote for sponsoring this video, and let's get back into it. Okay, so we talked about the why, but what about the how? Knowing that smear frames are more than just motion blur, how do you implement them effectively? And how do you do them in 3D where you wouldn't even be drawing them? First, let's talk about what we'll call classic smears, the huge ones that simulate motion blur. I personally have two guidelines that I stick pretty closely to. One is that smears should only appear for one frame, 2 frames maximum. And 2, smears should follow a very specific point A to point B path. For the first guideline, I think it's important to focus more on the before and after of a smear. Use a really strong pose with a lot of anticipation, smear for just 1 or 2 frames, and then a big reaction afterwards with every other part of the character following through. Hair, capes, and other body parts can catch up afterwards to give the smear more weight after it's already gone. Having a smear appear for anything more than 1 or 2 frames makes the smear feel like it's part of the character, like they're made of liquid, which can work if that's what you want, but I think it's for the best that you limit smears as much as possible. By only having it appear for 1 or 2 frames, it doesn't feel like part of the character, it feels like part of the movement itself. It augments the before and after, rather than focusing on just the smeared action itself, and gives the whole thing much more weight. The second rule, that classic smears have a point A to point B path, should be fairly easy to understand. And if you're familiar with other classical animation techniques like arcs, it follows the same idea. You have 2 key poses, and your smear links them together in a clear and easy to see path. Keep the details and shapes simple, keep the path clear and obvious, and whether it's an arc or a straight line, make sure they're linked together. Try to avoid having a gap between the smear and the other 2 frames. Otherwise, it's not obvious the smear is linked to the keyframes. If it's not a clear and obvious path from one frame to the next, the smear ends up being muddled and busy. Kind of worse than nothing at all, as your viewer might end up thinking, what just happened? So that's your classic smears, but the rules apply a little differently for other types of smears. You can basically ignore this for speed multiples since they usually appear for more than a few frames, and without any sort of path or arc. They're often used for a lot of little actions rather than one big action. But as mentioned earlier, nothing is stopping you from using multiples in much the same way you would classic smears, as an extra frame and to guide the eye along. As for more anime-style smears, they usually seek to emulate motion blur more closely, erasing parts of the liner and adding speed lines or smudges for several frames. Often the motion is even drawn entirely jittery to give it a sense of uncontrollable speed. Best seen in the work of Bahi JD. He tends to draw very controlled, on-model smears with a very jittery motion blur-like outline, and it's great. Anyways, I'll be here all day if I described all the little exceptions, but I wanted to offer my personal guidelines as to how I approach the most common types of smears. Ultimately, you should just try roughly drawing what you want the smear to look like, and see if it feels good. You won't really know until you see it in action. Real quick, let's wrap up by talking about smears in 3D. Smears obviously didn't appear in 3D for quite some time since 3D is all about rigs and interpolation, but nowadays smears are everywhere and becoming just as much of a staple of well-crafted, stylized 3D animation. Now, studios will talk all day about the systems and tech they have in place to create smears and multiples and all sorts of effects, but you really don't need anything that fancy. Remember that it's all in 1 or 2 frames, so it's not like whatever appears for a single frame needs to be modeled and rigged and simulated with the utmost precise detail. It can literally just be a flat piece of geometry. Like if you need speed lines to guide the eye, then there. That's it, go nuts. Or if you want to create a smear from the character's rig, just pose the character, copy the geometry, and delete any geometry that isn't part of the smear. There, now you have a multiple. Or you can make smears through blend shapes, and just sculpt the geometry the way you want. Go a step further and just use one big flat plane of colored geometry for the smear. Who cares? Again, it's usually only for a single frame. Whatever solution you come up with is fine. You really don't need anything more complicated than this, especially if you're working alone. As an example of this is basically what Guilty Gear does. I know I've brought up fighting games like 3 times in this video so far, which is silly because I have a fighting game video planned, but literally all they do is just model the geometry they want and put it in there for a single frame. That's it. All of this is totally fine. Nobody's gonna get mad at you for breaking rigs or using extremely simple solutions. This is cliche, but the most important part is to have fun with it. Smears are the most delightful aspect of animation. It's a concept that only truly exists in this medium, and audiences love seeing it because the only way that drawing could exist is because it was animated, part of a greater movement that's probably way more memorable and impactful as a result of the smear. Smears are the best, and I personally believe they evolved way beyond what they were originally intended for. Over time, we've discovered so many different purposes for them, and I wanted to offer my own guidance and philosophy on them. They're an extremely unique aspect of animation that's different for everybody. No 2 smears are alike, and I think that's awesome. Whether you're an animation lover that wanted to know some of the logic and theory behind smears, or an animator that was hoping to improve their own smears, I hope what's here is giving you a new perspective and some confidence to give it a try. Thanks for watching.